The Christmas lights were still blinking outside my bedroom window when my daughter Emma knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. I should have known something was wrong by the way she knocked. 3 sharp raps followed by silence, like she was delivering an eviction notice rather than wishing me a good morning. When I opened the door, she stood there in her silk pajamas, the ones I'd bought her from Nordstrom last month, holding a steaming cup of coffee that smelled expensive, the kind I couldn't afford for myself anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, we need to talk, she said, pushing past me into my bedroom without waiting for an invitation. Her tone was the same one she'd used as a teenager when she wanted to borrow the car, except now she was 25, and borrowing had become taking. She perched on the edge of my bed, crossing her legs with the confidence of someone who owned the place, which, technically, she didn't. Yet? What's on your mind, sweetheart? I asked, though something in my stomach was already twisting into knots. Emma only used that particular combination of casual authority and fake sweetness when she wanted something big. Something that would cost me more than money. She took a long sip of her coffee, letting the silence stretch until it felt deliberate. So, Derek and I have been talking, and we've decided to host Christmas here this year. You know, really do it right. His parents are flying in from Boston, my college friends are coming, plus some of his business associates. She paused, watching my face carefully. It's going to be quite the gathering. I nodded slowly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Emma had moved back in with me 6 months ago, after what she called a career transition. Though as far as I could tell, her career had transitioned from one unpaid internship to another. Derek, her boyfriend of 8 months, had been practically living here ever since, treating my refrigerator like his personal pantry and my living room like his office space for his, quote, consulting business. That sounds lovely, I said, though my mind was already calculating the cost of feeding a house full of people on my tight budget. How many people are we talking about? Oh, probably around 15 or 20. Nothing too crazy. She waved her hand dismissively, as if hosting 20 people for Christmas dinner was as simple as ordering pizza. The thing is, though, we're going to need some space to really make this work. You know how small the guest room is, and Derek's parents are used to a certain level of comfort. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. What are you suggesting? Emma's smile was bright and practiced, the same one she'd perfected for scholarship interviews and job applications. Well, I was thinking you could move up to the attic for a few days, just temporarily, of course. It would give us the whole second floor for guests, and you know how much privacy means to Derek's family. His dad is some big shot at a law firm, and his mom is really particular about her accommodations. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. You want me to sleep in the attic? In my own house? It's not that bad up there, Mom. We cleaned it out last spring, remember? There's even that old twin bed from when I was in middle school. And think about it this way. You'll have complete quiet. No party noise, no guests bothering you. It's really kind of perfect when you think about it. The casualness of her tone made it worse somehow, as if she were suggesting I try a new restaurant, rather than asking me to exile myself to the dusty, unheated space above my own bedroom. I opened my mouth to say no, to tell her the idea was ridiculous, but then I caught sight of myself in the dresser mirror. 53 years old, wearing a faded bathrobe I'd owned for 6 years, standing in a bedroom that desperately needed new curtains I couldn't afford. When had I become the kind of person whose own daughter could make such a request? With a straight face? Emma, that's... I started, but she was already standing up, setting her empty coffee cup on my nightstand without asking. I knew you'd understand. You're always so supportive of my goals, and this party could really be important for Derek's networking. You know how competitive the consulting world is. She leaned over and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, the kind of perfunctory gesture you'd give a distant relative. Oh, and we'll probably need to use your car too. Derek's BMW is in the shop, and we can't exactly pick up his parents in my little Honda. Image matters, you know. Before I could respond, she was already heading toward the door. I'm thinking we'll start moving your things upstairs this afternoon. The party's tomorrow night, so we really need to get everything set up. Derek's already ordered the catering. Nothing too fancy, just enough to make a good impression. Catering? The word came out as barely a whisper. Oh, don't worry about the cost. Derek's putting it on his credit card, and we'll figure out the money situation later. Maybe we can use some of that emergency fund you're always talking about. She paused in the doorway, her hand on the frame. Actually, speaking of money, Derek's parents are probably going to want to exchange gifts, and we want to make sure we don't look cheap. Could you spot us maybe $500 for presents? Just until Derek's next client payment comes in. And there it was. The real reason for the attic conversation, the warm-up act before the main event. I stood there in my old bathrobe, looking at my daughter's expectant face, and felt something inside me crack. Not break exactly, but develop a hairline fracture that would only get wider with time. I'll see what I can do, I heard myself saying, though I knew my checking account had barely $300 in it until my next paycheck. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Emma's smile was genuine now, bright with relief and satisfaction. This is going to be such an amazing Christmas. Derek's really excited for you to get to know his family better. After she left, I sat down heavily on my bed and stared at the coffee cup she'd left behind. It was one of my good ones, part of a set I'd received as a wedding gift 27 years ago. Most of the set had been broken over the years, victims of daily use and careless handling, but I'd managed to save a few pieces for special occasions. Apparently, Emma's morning coffee qualified as special, but my comfort in my own home did not. I picked up the cup and carried it to the kitchen, where Derek was standing at the counter eating cereal from a bowl that belonged to my grandmother. He looked up when I entered, his sandy hair still messed from sleep, wearing a t-shirt that probably cost more than my electric bill. "Morning, Ruth," he said around a mouthful of granola. "Emma told you about the Christmas plan, right? Pretty exciting stuff. My parents are going to love this place. It's got that authentic small-town charm they're always talking about." I set Emma's cup in the sink and turned to face him. "Derek, about the sleeping arrangements?" "Oh, the attic thing?" He waved his spoon dismissively. "Yeah, Emma mentioned that. Really smart thinking, actually. Privacy is huge for my parents, especially my dad. He's used to staying in hotels when he travels, so having his own space will really put him at ease." He took another bite of cereal, then added, "Plus, it's only for a few days. You won't even notice." The casual way he discussed my displacement, as if my comfort was a minor inconvenience to be managed rather than a fundamental consideration, made my chest tight with anger. But instead of saying what I was thinking, I found myself nodding again, falling into the same pattern of accommodation that had defined my relationship with Emma since she'd moved back home. "Right," I said quietly. "Just a few days." Derek's phone buzzed, and he immediately picked it up, his attention already shifting away from our conversation. "That's probably the caterer," he said, scrolling through his messages. "We're getting this amazing spread, stuffed salmon, prime rib, the..."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Works. Emma wanted to make sure we really impressed everyone. As he continued talking about the menu, listing off dishes that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a month, I excused myself and walked back to my bedroom. I needed to think, to process what was happening, but more than that, I needed to check something. I opened my purse and pulled out my wallet, digging past expired coupons and old receipts until I found what I was looking for. The lottery ticket was tucked behind my driver's license, slightly wrinkled from being handled so many times. I'd bought it 3 weeks ago at the gas station where I stopped for coffee every morning on my way to work. The jackpot had been building for months, reaching numbers that seemed almost fictional, and on impulse, I decided to try my luck. I still remembered the night I'd checked the numbers, sitting alone in my kitchen after Emma and Derek had gone out to dinner at a restaurant I couldn't afford. I'd pulled up the lottery website on my phone, expecting the familiar disappointment of non-matching numbers. Instead, I'd stared at the screen for 5 solid minutes, checking and rechecking, certain there had to be a mistake. $47 million. After taxes, it would still be more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. Enough to pay off my mortgage, to quit my job at the insurance office where I processed claims for 8 hours a day, to travel, to breathe freely for the first time in decades. The ticket was worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined, and it was sitting in my wallet like a piece of scrap paper. But I hadn't told anyone. Not Emma, not Derek, not even my sister Carol, who I usually told everything. Something had held me back. Some instinct that whispered I should wait, should see how things played out before I changed everything forever. Now, as I held the ticket between my fingers, I was grateful for that instinct, because watching my daughter casually exile me to the attic so she could impress her boyfriend's parents had clarified something important. It had shown me exactly how much my comfort, my dignity, my basic human worth mattered to the people I'd spent my entire adult life putting first. And the answer was not much at all. I tucked the lottery ticket back into my wallet and sat down on my bed, listening to Emma and Derek planning their party in the kitchen below. Their voices carried up through the thin walls, animated and excited as they discussed wine selections and playlist options. Not once did I hear my name mentioned, except in the context of logistics. Where would Ruth's car keys be? When could Ruth move her things upstairs? How much could they reasonably ask Ruth to contribute to the party fund? It was a strange thing, I realized, to become invisible in your own life. Not invisible like a ghost, but invisible like furniture. Present, functional, taken for granted until the moment you stopped working properly. Then suddenly everyone noticed you, but only to complain about the inconvenience you were causing. I'd been furniture in my marriage to Emma's father, Robert. 22 years of being the dependable one, the one who handled the practical details while he pursued his dreams of becoming a successful day trader. I'd worked full-time and managed the household budget, and raised Emma largely on my own, while Robert spent our savings on investment courses and trading software, and get-rich-quick schemes that never quite panned out. When he finally left me for a 28-year-old he'd met at a trading seminar, I'd felt relief more than heartbreak. At least then, I'd only had to support myself and Emma, instead of bankrolling a grown man's delusions of grandeur. But somehow, without my noticing, Emma had grown up to expect the same kind of unconditional support I'd given her father. The same assumption that my resources, my space, my comfort were always available for her use. The same casual disregard for my own needs and boundaries. The difference was that Emma was my daughter, and despite everything, I loved her. I wanted her to be happy, to be successful, to build a good life for herself. But watching her treat me like a convenient accessory to her own ambitions was forcing me to confront an uncomfortable truth. My love for her didn't seem to be reciprocated in any meaningful way. That afternoon, I found myself climbing the narrow stairs to the attic with an armload of my belongings. Emma had been right about one thing. We had cleaned it out the previous spring. What she hadn't mentioned was that cleaned out still meant dusty, cold, and filled with the musty smell of old cardboard and forgotten memories. The twin bed she'd referenced was indeed there, pushed against one wall and covered with a floral bedspread I'd made when Emma was 12. Next to it sat a small nightstand that had once belonged in the guest room, and across the room a single window looked out over the backyard where I used to hang laundry before the dryer was repaired. It wasn't the worst place to sleep, but it wasn't home either. It was exile disguised as accommodation, banishment dressed up as temporary convenience. As I made up the narrow bed with sheets that smelled like mothballs, I caught myself wondering how I'd reached this point. When had I become the kind of mother who could be displaced from her own bedroom without protest? When had my daughter become the kind of person who could ask such a thing? The questions didn't have easy answers, but they did clarify something important about the choice I was facing. I could claim my lottery winnings, announce my newfound wealth, and watch Emma's attitude transform overnight from casual dismissal to desperate attention. I could buy my way back into relevance in my own life, could use money to command the respect that should have been freely given. Or I could wait. I could see how far this dynamic would stretch, how much my daughter was willing to take before she remembered that I was a person deserving of basic consideration. I could learn who Emma really was when she thought I had nothing left to offer except my compliance. The lottery ticket seemed to pulse in my wallet as I considered my options. $47 million represented freedom, security, the power to never again have to choose between my dignity and my relationships. But it also represented a A chance to see what my family really thought of me when they believed I was powerless. Downstairs, I could hear Derek on the phone with someone, his voice carrying the confident tone of a man who'd never had to question his place in the world. "Yeah, we've got everything handled," he was saying. "The house is perfect, totally private. My parents are gonna love it." I smoothed the quilt over the narrow mattress and looked around the attic that would be my bedroom for the next several days. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and it was mine. And most importantly, it was the perfect vantage point from which to observe the true character of the people who thought they were using me. Emma called up the stairs that evening to let me know they were going out to dinner and wouldn't be back until late. "Don't wait up," she added, as if I were a babysitter rather than the woman who owned the house they were treating like their personal hotel. I waited until I heard Derek's Honda pull out of the driveway before I came back downstairs. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, coffee rings on the counter, crumbs scattered across the table. They'd made themselves at home, all right, but hadn't bothered to clean up after themselves. That was apparently my job, too. Instead of cleaning, I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat down at my kitchen table. Through the window, I could see the Christmas lights blinking on my neighbors' houses, warm and welcoming in the winter darkness. Mrs. Patterson next door had a beautiful display this year, with white lights outlining her entire roof and a lighted wreath on her front door. She was probably inside right now, warm and comfortable in her own home, surrounded by family who treated her with the respect she deserved. I pulled out my phone and looked up the lottery website, checking the unclaimed prize amount one more time. $47,200,000. The number was so large it didn't feel real, like a figure from someone else's life. But the ticket in my wallet was real enough, and so was the choice I was facing. Tomorrow night, Derek's parents would arrive. Emma and Derek would play the role of gracious hosts in my house, using my space and my resources to make an impression on people who probably had more money than I'd ever see. And I would be upstairs in the attic, out of sight and out of mind, like an embarrassing relative who couldn't be trusted to make appropriate conversation. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I finished my wine and went upstairs to my temporary bedroom, where I sat on the narrow bed and opened my laptop. If I was going to be invisible for the next few days, I might as well use the time productively. I had some research to do about lottery winnings, about tax implications and financial planning, and the logistics of claiming such a massive prize. But more than that, I wanted to understand exactly what I was worth to the people who thought they knew me. Because something told me that before this Christmas was over, I was going to find out exactly how much my daughter valued our relationship when she thought I had nothing left to give. The attic was cold that first night, and the narrow bed was uncomfortable in ways that reminded me I wasn't 25 anymore. But as I lay there listening to the house settle around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, I didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, and instead of feeling anxious about the uncertainty, I felt oddly exhilarated. Change was coming. I could feel it in the air, like electricity before a storm. And whether that change came in the form of claimed lottery winnings, or simply the claiming of my own self-respect, I knew that this Christmas was going to be different from any other in my life. In my wallet downstairs, tucked safely behind my driver's license, $47 million waited for my decision. But up in the attic, wrapped in blankets that smelled like my past and staring out a window that showed me my future, I was beginning to understand that the real prize wasn't the money. It was the clarity that came from seeing myself through my daughter's eyes, and finally deciding I didn't like what I saw there. The real prize was remembering that I had the power to change it. The next morning brought chaos in the form of Emma's frantic energy and Derek's increasingly elaborate plans. I woke up in the attic to the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor below, punctuated by Emma's sharp instructions about where everything should go. When I climbed down the narrow stairs at 7:30, still wearing yesterday's clothes because I'd forgotten to bring enough changes of clothing to my exile, I found my living room transformed. The comfortable sofa where I'd spent countless evenings reading had been pushed against the far wall to make room for a rented cocktail table. My coffee table, the one Robert and I had bought at a garage sale during our second year of marriage, was nowhere to be seen. In its place stood an elaborate arrangement of white flowers that looked expensive and smelled overwhelmingly sweet. Emma was directing Derek as he hung string lights across the ceiling, stepping back every few seconds to assess the effect with the critical eye of someone planning a magazine photo shoot. "Mom, there you are," Emma said when she noticed me standing in the doorway. She was wearing yoga pants and a cashmere sweater I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that probably took 20 minutes to achieve. "We need to talk about the timeline for today. Derek's parents' flight lands at 3, so we need everything perfect by 2 at the latest." I nodded, still trying to process the transformation of my familiar space into something that felt like a hotel lobby. "What do you need me to do?" "Well, first, we need you to pick up the catering order." Derek was going to do it, but his conference call with that potential client got moved to this morning, and we can't reschedule because the guy's flying to Europe tomorrow. She handed me a piece of paper with an address written in Derek's precise handwriting. "It's about 40 minutes away, but they close at noon, so you'll need to leave soon." I looked at the address and felt my stomach drop. 40 minutes away meant at least an hour and a half round trip, probably more with traffic. "Emma, that's going to take most of the morning. What about helping you set up here?" "Oh, Derek and I have that covered. Actually, it's probably better if you're not here while we're doing the final decorating. You know how you get nervous about moving things around." She said this with the same tone she might use to discuss a beloved but anxious pet, affectionately dismissive. Plus, this gives you a chance to contribute something meaningful to the party. The phrase "something meaningful" hit me oddly. Driving an hour and a half to pick up food that Derek had ordered, using my car and my gas and my time, was my meaningful contribution. Not hosting the party in my home, not allowing them to rearrange my furniture, not sleeping in the attic so their guests could be comfortable. The errand was what counted as meaningful. "What about the cost?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Emma's smile flickered slightly. "Oh, Derek was hoping you could cover that part. His client payment got delayed, and we already put down the deposit on his credit card. It's only $350, and we'll pay you back as soon as his check comes in." $350. More than my entire grocery budget for the month, and nearly everything I had in my checking account until payday. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with these financial requests. The same sensation I'd experienced during my marriage, when Robert would casually mention needing money for another trading course or investment opportunity. "I'll see what I can do," I said, falling back on my standard response. "Thanks, Mom, you're amazing." Emma's relief was genuine, which somehow made it worse. She truly believed that my value lay in my willingness to solve problems, with my wallet, and my compliance. "Oh, and when you get back, could you park around the corner? Derek's parents are used to a certain aesthetic, and your Honda is kind of—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. My 12-year-old Honda Accord, with its fading paint and slight dent in the rear bumper, didn't fit the image Derek wanted to project. Even my car was an embarrassment to be hidden away. I went upstairs to get dressed, choosing my clothes carefully. If I was going to be the designated errand runner, I might as well look presentable while doing it. In the attic, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations that Emma and Derek hadn't bothered to use, I found myself thinking about Christmases past. The years when Emma was small and excited about everything. When decorating the tree was a family event that took an entire evening and resulted in a lopsided, overladen creation that was beautiful in its imperfection. Now Emma wanted perfection, or at least the appearance of it. She wanted a Christmas that would photograph well, that would impress people who mattered to Derek's career prospects. The actual spirit of the holiday, the warmth and connection and gratitude, seemed beside the point. The catering company was located in an upscale shopping district I rarely visited, the kind of place where parking cost more than I usually spent on lunch. The woman behind the counter was professionally cheerful as she loaded tray after tray of elaborate food into my car, chatting about the menu as if I were the one who had ordered it. "This is going to be such a lovely spread," she said, carefully arranging containers of stuffed salmon and herb-crusted beef tenderloin in my back seat. The person who placed the order really knew what they were doing. Very sophisticated palate. I nodded and handed over my debit card, watching my account balance flash on the screen as the transaction processed. $357.43, including tax. My checking account now had $42.18 to last until Friday. As I drove home, the smell of expensive food filling my car, I found myself thinking about the lottery ticket in my wallet. With one phone call, I could have catering delivered every day for the rest of my life. I could have my house professionally decorated, could hire people to clean and organize and handle every detail of entertaining. I could live the kind of life Derek was pretending to live, except it would be real. But I didn't make that call. Instead, I drove home to find my driveway blocked by a sleek black BMW with Massachusetts plates. Derek's parents had arrived early. I parked around the corner as instructed and carried the catering trays the 2 blocks to my house, making 3 separate trips because the food was too heavy and bulky to manage all at once. By the time I reached my front door for the 3rd time, I was sweating despite the December cold, and my arms ached from the awkward weight of the containers. Emma answered the door wearing a different outfit now, a navy blue dress that looked expensive and professional. Behind her, I could see Derek talking animatedly to a distinguished-looking couple in their 60s. The man wore a perfectly tailored suit even though it was a casual Saturday afternoon, and the woman was dressed in the kind of understated elegance that whispered money rather than shouting it. "Perfect timing," Emma said, taking the last tray from my hands. "Mom, come meet Derek's parents. Richard and Patricia Thornton, this is my mother, Ruth Wilson." Richard Thornton stepped forward with the confident smile of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of handshake that probably came with lessons in how to project authority. "Ruth, wonderful to meet you. Derek has told us so much about you." I doubted that was true, given that Derek barely seemed to register my existence most of the time, but I smiled and said the appropriate things about being pleased to meet them and hoping their flight had been comfortable. Patricia Thornton looked around my living room with the appraising eye of someone who spent a lot of time in other people's homes and had opinions about what she saw. "What a charming place," she said in a tone that somehow made charming sound like a polite way of saying small. "So authentic. Derek mentioned you've lived here for quite a while." 23 years, I said, then immediately wondered if I should have mentioned the length of time. Did it make me sound settled and stable, or stuck and unable to afford anything better? "How wonderful to have that kind of stability," Patricia continued. "Richard and I have moved so many times for his career. Different cities, different houses, but I suppose that's the price of success in a competitive field." The implication was clear. Staying in one place for over 2 decades was what people did when they didn't have better options, when their lives weren't important enough to require mobility and change. I felt the familiar sting of judgment wrapped in polite conversation. "Mom, why don't you get the appetizers arranged while we show Richard and Patricia around the house?" Emma suggested, already moving toward the stairs. "We'll be back down in a few minutes." And just like that, I was dismissed to the kitchen while the real family showed off the real house to the real guests. I could hear their voices as they moved through the rooms upstairs, Emma pointing out features, and Derek adding commentary about the neighborhood and the local amenities. Occasionally, Patricia's laughter drifted down, bright and social, the sound of someone being charmed by people she found worth her attention. I arranged canapés on my grandmother's serving platters, the good china I'd inherited, and rarely used because it required hand-washing and careful handling. The stuffed salmon looked elegant against the delicate floral pattern, and, for a moment, I felt a flicker of pride in how the presentation turned out. Then I remembered that Derek would probably get the credit for the sophisticated menu choice, and Emma would get the credit for the lovely presentation, and I would get the credit for nothing except perhaps managing not to embarrass anyone. When they returned to the living room, Derek immediately began opening a bottle of wine, something expensive-looking that I was certain I hadn't bought. Patricia settled onto my sofa with the air of someone claiming territory, while Richard examined the appetizer display with the same appraising look his wife had given my furniture. "This all looks delicious," he said, selecting a piece of the stuffed salmon. "You must have an excellent caterer." "Derek found them," Emma said quickly. "He has such good taste when it comes to these things. I never would have thought of half these combinations." Derek smiled modestly while accepting the compliment for food he'd ordered with my money. I've had to learn to appreciate good cuisine for business entertaining. Clients notice these details, especially in consulting. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel and feeling like an intruder in my own home. The conversation flowed around me without including me, touching on Derek's business prospects, Emma's job search, Richard's latest cases, Patricia's charity work. I was present but irrelevant, like background music playing at a volume too low to really notice. "Ruth, won't you join us?" Patricia finally asked, though her tone suggested she was making the invitation out of politeness rather than genuine interest. I sat down in the armchair that used to be my preferred spot for reading, though it felt different now with strangers occupying my living room. The conversation resumed, but I found myself studying the dynamics rather than participating in them. Derek deferred to his father with the careful attention of someone still seeking approval despite being well into adulthood. Emma positioned herself as Derek's partner in sophistication, distancing herself from her background by association with his. Richard held court with the unconscious authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to be the center of attention. And Patricia watched everything with sharp eyes, cataloging details to be discussed later in private. None of them seemed particularly interested in me as a person. I was Derek's girlfriend's mother, a supporting character in the story of their family gathering. My role was to provide the venue and handle the logistics, not to participate as an equal in the social interaction. "Emma tells us you work in insurance," Richard said during a lull in the conversation, the way someone might ask about the weather when they'd run out of more interesting topics. "I do. I process claims for Midwest Mutual." The words sounded even more mundane than usual when spoken to someone who probably spent more on suits than I made in 6 months. "Important work," he said, with the kind of dismissive politeness reserved for jobs that people considered necessary but unremarkable. "Everyone needs insurance." The conversation moved on immediately, flowing back to Derek's business prospects and the networking opportunities available in Boston. I listened to them discuss Derek's 5-year plan, his strategy for building his client base, his eventual goal of starting his own firm. It was clear that Richard was already envisioning Derek as a future son-in-law, and Patricia was assessing Emma's suitability as a future daughter-in-law. This Christmas gathering wasn't just social, it was an audition, and I was the prop that made it possible, the convenient backdrop against which their real lives could unfold. "Where will you be staying tonight?" Patricia asked Emma as the afternoon wore on. "Oh, I'm in my old room," Emma replied. "And Derek is in the guest room, of course. We wanted to make sure you and Richard had the master suite for maximum comfort." I felt my mouth open slightly before I caught myself. The master suite, my bedroom which I'd vacated so Derek's parents could have privacy and comfort. Emma was talking about it as if the decision had been a mutual one, a gracious gesture from a thoughtful hostess rather than my exile to the attic. "How thoughtful," Patricia said. "We do appreciate having our own space when we travel. Hotels can be so impersonal." "Well, we wanted this to feel like home for you," Derek added. "Family is the most important thing, especially during the holidays. Family." I was sitting right there, listening to them discuss my bedroom as if I didn't exist, and Derek was talking about family being important. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. "Mom, could you check on dinner?" Emma asked. "I think the timer might have gone off." There was no timer, and no dinner cooking, but I recognized the dismissal for what it was. Emma wanted me out of the room, while they continued their adult conversation. I stood up, smoothed my skirt and went to the kitchen, where I could hear their voices but couldn't make out individual words. Through the window above my sink, I watched Mrs. Patterson hanging Christmas stockings on her front porch while her grandson helped by handing her clothespins. They were laughing about something, and even from a distance I could see the easy affection between them. Mrs. Patterson's family visited her, not the other way around. They came to her house as guests, treated her as the matriarch she was, deferred to her preferences, and thanked her for her hospitality. I tried to imagine Emma treating me that way, and found I couldn't picture it. Emma had never seen me as someone to be deferred to, someone whose preferences mattered, someone worthy of gratitude. I'd spent so many years being accommodating, so many years putting her needs first, that she'd grown up thinking my needs didn't exist at all. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister Carol. "How's Christmas prep going?" Emma must be excited to have her first grown-up holiday hosting. Send pictures. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Going well. We'll send pictures later." I couldn't bring myself to explain that Emma wasn't hosting anything, that she was playing hostess in my house with my resources, while I hid in the kitchen like hired help. Carol still thought of Emma as the sweet girl who'd sent handmade Christmas cards every year through high school. She didn't know about the entitled young woman who could ask her mother to sleep in the attic without a flicker of conscience. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had shifted to travel plans. Richard and Patricia were discussing their upcoming cruise, Richard was describing a business trip to London, and Derek was explaining his strategy for building an international client base. Emma listened to all of this with the rapt attention of someone trying to memorize a blueprint for the life she wanted. "We should probably start thinking about dinner reservations," Patricia said eventually. "Richard has that wonderful steakhouse he wanted to try, the one with the wine cellar." "Actually," Derek said, "I made reservations at Chez Laurent for 7:30. I thought you'd enjoy the French cuisine, and it's supposed to have an excellent wine list." I did quick mental math. Dinner for 4 at Chez Laurent would probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. But more than that, I realized I hadn't been included in the dinner plans. While they'd been discussing travel and business, they'd also apparently been planning their evening, and I wasn't part of it. "That sounds wonderful," Emma said. "Mom, you don't mind holding down the fort here, do you? We'll probably be out pretty late, and I know you prefer to get to bed early anyway." She said it as if she were doing me a favor, as if staying home alone on Christmas Eve, while my daughter had dinner with her boyfriend's family was a preference rather than an exclusion. And the terrible thing was that part of me was relieved. The prospect of sitting through a expensive dinner, where I was clearly the fifth wheel, where every conversation topic would remind me of how little I had in common with these people, was exhausting, just to contemplate. "Of course," I said. "You all have a wonderful time." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." Emma leaned over and gave me another one of those quick, perfunctory kisses that felt more like checking a box than expressing affection. They left at 6:30, Derek helping his parents into their BMW, while Emma locked my front door behind them. I watched from the window as they drove away, 4 people dressed for an expensive evening out, heading to a restaurant where the wine probably cost more than my weekly salary. Then I was alone in my house that no longer felt like my house, surrounded by rented furniture and expensive flowers that smelled like someone else's idea of luxury. I made myself a sandwich with the leftover turkey from my lunch meat and sat down at my kitchen table, which was the only surface that still felt familiar. The lottery ticket was still in my wallet, still representing more money than all 4 of them would spend tonight, still waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I pulled it out and set it on the table next to my simple dinner, studying the numbers that could change everything. $47 million. Enough money to never again have to choose between my dignity and my relationships. Enough money to buy respect, or at least the appearance of it. Enough money to make Emma see me as someone worth considering instead of someone to be managed. But as I sat there in my quiet kitchen, eating my simple dinner and thinking about the family who'd left me behind without a second thought, I realized something important. The money could buy me a lot of things, but it couldn't buy me a daughter who loved me enough to include me in her life without being forced to. It couldn't buy me genuine respect from people who only valued me for what I could provide. And more than that, claiming the money now would mean I'd never really know who these people were when they thought I had nothing to offer. I'd never know if Emma was capable of treating me better, or if Derek could learn to see me as a person rather than a convenience. I'd never know if Richard and Patricia were simply reflecting the values their son had shown them, or if they were genuinely the kind of people who looked down on others. I folded the lottery ticket and put it back in my wallet. Not because I was afraid to claim it, but because I was curious to see how much further this could go. How much were they willing to take? How little were they willing to give in return? And what would happen when I finally decided I'd learned enough? Outside, Christmas lights twinkled on every house except mine. Emma and Derek had been too busy with their party preparations to bother with external decorations, and I'd been too busy serving their needs to think about my own preferences. But tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and I was beginning to think it might be time to give myself a present that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with self-respect. The house felt different when they were gone. Quieter, but also more mine somehow, as if their absence allowed my presence to expand back into the spaces I'd been subtly pushed out of. I turned on some music, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd been saving, and sat down in my living room to think. By the time they returned from dinner, laughing and slightly tipsy from expensive wine, I'd made a decision. Not about the lottery ticket, not yet, but about something else entirely. Something that would test exactly how much they'd been taking me for granted, and exactly how much they valued my contributions to their comfort. They were about to find out that furniture, even the most reliable piece, could sometimes stop working when you least expected it. Christmas Eve morning arrived with Emma pounding on my attic door at 6:15. I'd been awake for an hour already, listening to the sounds of preparation echoing through the house below, but I hadn't moved from the narrow bed. Something about lying there in the dusty half-light, surrounded by forgotten Christmas decorations and childhood memories, felt appropriate. I was becoming a forgotten thing myself, stored away where I wouldn't interfere with the real family's activities. "Mom, we have a crisis," Emma called through the thin door. "The caterer just called and said they can't deliver the breakfast pastries because their van broke down. We need someone to pick them up before 8, and Derek's car won't start." I sat up slowly, my back protesting the uncomfortable mattress. Through the small attic window, I could see frost covering the neighbors' cars, and my breath was visible in the cold air. The heat apparently didn't reach this far up in the house, another detail Emma had conveniently forgotten to mention when she'd suggested my temporary relocation. "Mom, did you hear me?" Emma's voice carried an edge of panic now. "Richard and Patricia are expecting fresh croissants and those Danish things they serve at the Four Seasons. We can't just give them grocery store donuts." I pulled on yesterday's sweater and opened the door. Emma stood there in an expensive silk robe, her hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. Behind her, I could hear Derek's voice on the phone, explaining to someone that they absolutely had to have the car fixed today because they had important plans. "The pastry place is 40 minutes away," I said, though I suspected Emma already knew this. I know, but you're the only one who can go. Derek's dealing with the car situation, and I have to stay here to coordinate everything else." Patricia mentioned she always has pastries with her morning coffee, and apparently it's this whole ritual she's used to from their country club. Emma's hands fluttered as she spoke, gesticulating in a way that reminded me of her father when he was trying to justify another impractical expense. "Emma, it's Christmas Eve. Most places won't even be open that early. This place will be. I called ahead and they're making a special exception for us." Well, for Derek technically. He knows the owner through some business connection. She paused, then added with the kind of smile that meant she was about to ask for something else. "And since you're going anyway, could you stop at that specialty coffee place next door? Patricia only drinks this particular Ethiopian blend, and Derek promised she could have it with breakfast." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, standing in the hallway of my house in a robe that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, asking me to drive an hour and a half on Christmas Eve morning to fetch breakfast for people who hadn't bothered to learn my name properly. Richard kept calling me Rose, and Patricia had referred to me as Emma's mother in every conversation, as if I didn't have an identity beyond my relationship to her daughter. "How much is all this going to cost?" I asked. Emma's smile flickered. "Derek said it should be around $200, maybe $250 with the coffee. His payment still hasn't come through, but he swore he'd have it by tomorrow, and this is really important for making a good impression. $250. More than I had in my checking account, and we both knew it. Emma was asking me to overdraw my account, to pay bank fees on top of the actual cost, to put myself in financial jeopardy so that Derek could impress his parents with specialty pastries and exotic coffee. Emma, I don't have that kind of money available right now. Mom, come on, it's Christmas. Can't you just put it on a credit card or something? This is really important to Derek's future, and that means it's important to my future too." Her voice took on the wheedling tone she'd perfected as a teenager, the one that used to make me cave to her requests even when I knew better. "My credit cards are maxed out." This was mostly true. I had about $300 available on one card, but that was my emergency fund, the buffer that kept me from disaster if my car broke down or I had a medical emergency. Emma's expression shifted, cycling through frustration, disbelief, and finally settling on something that looked like disgust. Mom, how do you not have $200? You work full-time. Where does all your money go? The question hung in the air between us like an accusation. Where did my money go? It went to the mortgage on the house she was currently redecorating. It went to utilities that had increased since she and Derek had moved in, and started running the heat higher, taking longer showers, and leaving lights on all over the house. It went to groceries that disappeared faster than I could buy them, to higher water bills, to the increased wear and tear on everything from furniture to appliances that came with having 3 adults living in a space designed for one. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I heard myself offering the same solution I'd been trained to offer for the past 25 years. I'll figure something out. Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd come through. Emma's relief was genuine and immediate, as if she'd never really doubted that I would find a way to solve her problem. The pastry place opens at 7, so if you leave by 6:30, you should be back before they come downstairs for breakfast. She started to turn away, then paused. Oh, and when you get back, could you use the side door? Derek's parents might be having coffee on the back patio, and we don't want to disturb them with all the coming and going. The side door. Like a delivery person or a service worker, someone who wasn't supposed to be seen by the real residents of the house. I nodded, too tired to argue anymore, too worn down by the constant erosion of my dignity to fight this particular battle. I dressed quickly in the dim attic light, grabbing my warmest coat and the purse that contained my credit cards and the lottery ticket that could solve every financial problem I'd ever have. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my daughter worried about impressing Derek's parents with expensive pastries, I was carrying enough money to buy the bakery, the coffee shop, and probably the entire shopping center where they were located. The drive was peaceful in the way that early Christmas Eve mornings can be, when the world feels hushed and expectant. Most people were still sleeping, preparing for family gatherings that would happen in their own homes, surrounded by people who loved them. I drove through neighborhoods decorated with lights and wreaths, past houses where families were probably waking up excited about the day ahead, and I felt a strange sense of detachment from it all. When had I stopped being part of Christmas and started being just the person who made Christmas possible for other people? The specialty bakery was in an upscale shopping district that I recognized from the catering pickup yesterday. The kind of place where parking meters ran even on holidays and store windows displayed single items with price tags that made me wince. The owner, a thin man with flour-dusted hands and tired eyes, was clearly not happy about being open at 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve. "You're the Wilson order?" he asked without preamble. "That's right." He gestured toward a display case filled with pastries that looked more like artwork than food. "Your friend Derek was very specific about what he wanted. Said it had to be exactly like what they serve at some hotel in Boston." The way he said it suggested Derek had not made a good impression during his ordering call. As he boxed up croissants and Danish pastries and something called pain au chocolat that cost $8 per piece, I did mental math. 12 pastries at an average of $6 each. A pound of the special Ethiopian coffee at $45. Tax. Tip, because the man was working on Christmas Eve morning for Derek's convenience. The total came to $287.33. I stood there at the counter, credit card in hand, and felt something inside me finally snap. Not break, exactly, but shift into a different position, like a bone that had been out of joint for years suddenly popping back into place. "Actually," I said, putting my credit card back in my wallet, "I've changed my mind." The baker looked up from the register, his finger hovering over the final key. "Sorry, I've changed my mind. I don't want to purchase these." "Lady, I've been here since 5 a.m., making this order. Your friend Derek said it was urgent, said you'd definitely be here to pay for it." "Derek isn't my friend," I said calmly. "Derek is my daughter's boyfriend, and this isn't my order. I was just sent to pick it up." The man's expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. "So who's paying for this?" "That's an excellent question," I said, "but it's not my problem to solve." I walked out of the bakery, leaving behind $287 worth of specialty pastries and exotic coffee. The morning air felt crisp and clean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe fully. My phone started ringing before I'd even reached my car. Emma's name flashed on the screen, but I didn't answer. It rang again as I started the engine, and again as I pulled out of the parking lot. By the time I reached the main road, I had 6 missed calls and 3 text messages. I didn't read the texts until I stopped at a red light. The first one was all caps. "Mom, where are you?" The bakery called and said you left without paying. The second was more desperate. "Please call me back. We need to figure this out." The third was angry. "This is really embarrassing. Derek's parents are going to think we're flaky." I turned off my phone and drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods I rarely visited. Past the country club, where Patricia probably had her morning pastries served on china plates by staff who were paid to be invisible. Past the corporate offices, where Richard made more in a month than I made in a year. Past the expensive shops where Derek bought clothes designed to project success he hadn't actually achieved yet. When I finally pulled into my driveway, Derek was waiting on the front porch. His car was still dead in the driveway, hood up and jumper cables attached to Richard's BMW. Both men looked up when I arrived, and I could see Derek's face cycle through relief, confusion, and then anger as he realized I was alone. "Ruth, where are the pastries?" Richard called out, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone who wasn't used to having his expectations disappointed. I got out of my car slowly, taking my time to gather my purse and lock the doors. "There are no pastries." "What do you mean there are no pastries?" Derek jogged over, his face flushed with cold and anxiety. "Emma said you went to pick them up." The bakery called and said something about payment, but I couldn't understand what they were talking about. I decided not to buy them. Derek stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You decided not to buy them? Ruth, my parents are expecting breakfast. We talked about this." Emma explained how important this was. "Yes, she explained that it was important to you. But she didn't explain why that made it my responsibility to pay for it." Richard had approached during this exchange, and now he stood beside Derek with the same confused expression. "I'm sorry, is there some kind of financial issue here?" "Derek, I thought you said this was all arranged." "It was arranged," Derek said, shooting me a look that was part plea and part warning. "Ruth, we can discuss the money later. Right now we just need to figure out breakfast for my parents." "There's cereal in the kitchen," I said pleasantly, "and bread for toast. Coffee in the regular can, not the exotic Ethiopian variety, but it's perfectly drinkable." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, I could see Patricia appear in the doorway, elegant even in her morning robe, surveying the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Derek? Is everything all right?" she called. "Everything's fine, Mom," Derek called back, though his voice was tight with stress. "Just a small mix-up with breakfast. We'll have it sorted out in a few minutes." He turned back to me, lowering his voice. "Ruth, please, I'll pay you back today, I swear. My client payment is definitely coming through this afternoon. This is just really bad timing." "You know what else is bad timing?" I said, my voice still pleasantly calm. "Being asked to spend money I don't have to impress people who don't care about me. Being sent on errands like hired help in my own house. Being expected to sleep in the attic so your parents can have my bedroom." Richard's eyebrows rose. "The attic?" Derek shot me another warning look. "Ruth is just being dramatic. She offered to use the guest room upstairs so my parents could have more space." "The guest room," I repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling the attic now? How interesting." The front door opened and Emma emerged, fully dressed and trying to project calm authority despite the panic in her eyes. "Good morning, Richard," she said brightly. "I hope you slept well. There's been a tiny mix-up with breakfast, but we're getting it sorted out." "What kind of mix-up?" Patricia had joined the group now, and her question carried the sharp edge of someone who suspected she wasn't getting the full story. Emma glanced at me, then at Derek, then back at me. The bakery had some confusion about payment. Mom was supposed to pick up pastries, but there was apparently some issue with the credit card authorization. It was smoothly done, I had to admit. Emma had managed to acknowledge the problem while implying that it was a technical difficulty, rather than my deliberate choice. She'd protected Derek from looking incompetent while making me appear unreliable without actually saying so. Actually, I said, there was no issue with credit card authorization. I simply chose not to spend nearly $300 on breakfast pastries. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes explosions. Emma's face went white, Derek's went red, and Richard and Patricia exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their assessment of the family dynamics they'd walked into. $300? Patricia said faintly. For pastries, I confirmed, plus specialty coffee that costs $45 a pound. Richard cleared his throat. That does seem rather excessive for breakfast. Derek rallied quickly. Dad, you don't understand. This is a specialty bakery. They use imported ingredients. Everything is handmade. It's not like buying regular pastries from a grocery store. I'm sure it's very nice, Richard said diplomatically, but perhaps we could just have regular breakfast? I'm not particularly fussy about pastries. This was clearly not the response Derek had hoped for. His entire plan for impressing his parents was crumbling, and worse, it was crumbling in a way that made him look foolish and financially irresponsible. Mom, Emma said, her voice carrying a warning. Could I talk to you privately for a minute? We walked around to the side of the house, out of earshot of Derek and his parents. Emma's composure cracked the moment we were alone. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. You're embarrassing me in front of Derek's family. These people are important to our future. Your future, I corrected. They're important to your future. They're nothing to me except strangers who expect me to finance their comfort. Mom, this isn't like you. You're always so reasonable, so supportive. What's gotten into you? Maybe I'm tired of being reasonable when no one else is being reasonable to me. Maybe I'm tired of being supportive when I'm not receiving any support in return. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like tears of frustration than genuine emotion. I don't understand what you want from me. I've tried to include you in everything. I invited you to be part of this Christmas celebration. You invited me to pay for this Christmas celebration. You invited me to work for this Christmas celebration. You invited me to sleep in the attic so other people could enjoy this Christmas celebration. But you didn't invite me to actually participate in it. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my plans for Christmas? When was the last time you asked what I wanted to do, or where I wanted to go, or how I wanted to celebrate? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a resource? Emma wiped her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I thought you liked helping. I thought you wanted to be involved. I do want to be involved. But I want to be involved as your mother, not as your unpaid assistant. I want to be included in conversations, not sent to run errands. I want to be treated like family, not like staff. For a moment, Emma looked genuinely confused, as if she truly couldn't see the difference between the two things. Then her expression hardened. Fine, she said. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should just stay out of it entirely. Derek and I can handle Christmas ourselves. That sounds like an excellent plan, I said. Except for one small detail. What? It's my house. Emma stared at me, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to navigate this new dynamic. For her entire adult life, I'd been predictable, manageable, reliable, in my willingness to put her needs ahead of my own. The idea that I might have boundaries, that I might say no, that I might prioritize my own comfort and dignity, was clearly foreign to her. Mom, you're being unreasonable. It's Christmas Eve. Derek's parents are here. We can't just cancel everything. You don't have to cancel anything. You just have to figure out how to do it without using me as your personal ATM and accommodation service. Where are we supposed to get money for food? For decorations? For all the things we need? That's not my problem to solve. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I was refusing to solve someone else's problem, refusing to sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's convenience. Emma's tears were flowing freely now, but they still looked more angry than sad. I can't believe you're doing this to me, to us. What am I supposed to tell Derek? What am I supposed to tell his parents? Tell them the truth. Tell them you planned a Christmas celebration you couldn't afford and expected your mother to pay for it. Tell them you asked your mother to sleep in the attic so they could have her bedroom. Tell them you've been treating your mother like hired help in her own house. I haven't been treating you like hired help. Haven't you? When was the last time you thanked me for something instead of just expecting it? When was the last time you asked for my help instead of demanding it? When was the last time you included me in your plans instead of just assigning me tasks to make your plans possible? Emma opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. I could see her mentally reviewing the past few days, looking for evidence to contradict what I'd said. Apparently, she couldn't find any. "This is all Derek's fault," she said finally. "He's the one who wanted to impress his parents. He's the one who came up with all these expensive plans. And you're the one who decided to make them my responsibility. Derek didn't ask me to pay for pastries. Derek didn't ask me to sleep in the attic. Derek didn't ask me to use my car and my gas and my time to run errands for his convenience. You did all of that. Because I thought you cared about my happiness. I do care about your happiness. But I've learned that caring about your happiness doesn't have to mean sacrificing my own dignity. I've learned that supporting you doesn't have to mean enabling you." Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to keep arguing or try a different approach. Finally, she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she said. "If this is how you want to be, then we'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect me to keep trying to include you if you're going to be difficult about everything." "I don't expect you to include me," I said. "I expect you to treat me with basic respect and consideration. And if you can't do that, then maybe it's better if we don't spend Christmas together." The words surprised us both. Emma's eyes widened, and I felt a flutter of panic at what I'd just said. But underneath the panic was something else. Relief. Relief at finally saying what I'd been thinking for days. Relief at finally drawing a line in the sand. "You don't mean that," Emma said. "I might," I said. "We'll see how the rest of the day goes." I walked back around to the front of the house, leaving Emma standing by, herself. Derek and his parents were still clustered around the cars, but their conversation stopped when I appeared. All three of them looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed hostility. "Is everything sorted out?" Richard asked, with the careful politeness of someone who suspected it wasn't. "Not exactly," I said, "but Emma and Derek are working on alternative arrangements for breakfast." "Alternative arrangements?" Patricia repeated. "Yes, it seems the original plan wasn't quite as well thought out as everyone hoped." Derek stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. "Ruth, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. When I arranged for the pastries, I was told that payment had been handled." "By whom?" "By Emma. She said you'd agreed to cover breakfast as your contribution to the weekend." I looked at Derek steadily, noting the way he'd shifted the responsibility to Emma while making it sound like I'd volunteered for an expense I'd never agreed to. "And did Emma mention how much this contribution would cost?" Derek's cheeks flushed. "Well, no, but I assumed it was within reasonable limits." $300 for breakfast pastries seemed reasonable to you?" Richard coughed. "Perhaps we should all go inside and discuss this over regular coffee. I'm sure we can sort out any confusion." "There's no confusion," I said. "There's just a difference of opinion about who should pay for Derek's expensive tastes." The silence stretched uncomfortably until Patricia stepped forward with a bright, diplomatic smile. "You know what? I think I'd actually prefer regular breakfast anyway. All those rich pastries would probably upset my stomach." "Richard, didn't you pack those protein bars you like? We could just have those with coffee." It was a graceful attempt to defuse the situation, but it came too late. The damage was done, and everyone knew it. Derek's grand plan to impress his parents had collapsed into awkward family drama, and his inability to pay for his own arrangements had been exposed in the most embarrassing way possible. Emma reappeared, her makeup repaired and her composure restored, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Why don't we all go inside and I'll make us some regular breakfast? I think we have eggs and bacon." "Actually," I said, "I think I'll pass on breakfast. I have some things to take care of upstairs." "In the attic?" Patricia asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested Emma's earlier explanation about guest rooms hadn't been entirely convincing. "Yes," I said. "In the attic, where I've been sleeping so you could have my bedroom." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This wasn't confusion or embarrassment. This was the dawning realization that the family dynamic they'd walked into was far more dysfunctional than they'd been led to believe. I climbed the stairs to my exile, leaving the four of them standing in my driveway, trying to figure out how to salvage a Christmas celebration that had been built on assumptions that no longer applied. From the attic window, I watched Richard and Patricia exchange worried glances while Derek and Emma huddled together in urgent conversation. They looked like people who'd stepped into quicksand and were just beginning to realize they were sinking. In my wallet, the lottery ticket waited patiently for my decision. $47 million that could solve every problem, smooth every conflict, buy back every bridge I'd just burned. But for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about the look on Emma's face when I'd told her I might not want to spend Christmas with her. I was thinking about the surprise in Derek's voice when I'd refused to solve his problem. I was thinking about the way Patricia had looked at me when she realized I'd been sleeping in the attic. I was thinking about the fact that, for the first time in years, people were seeing me as a person instead of a function. And even if that person was currently difficult and unreasonable and inconvenient, at least she was finally visible. It was a start. The afternoon brought a tense quiet to the house, punctuated by hushed conversations and the occasional slam of a cabinet door. From my position in the attic, I could hear the muffled sounds of damage control happening below. Emma's voice, bright with forced cheer as she tried to salvage the day. Derek's lower tones, explaining something with increasing urgency. Richard and Patricia's responses, polite but notably cooler than they'd been that morning. I sat on the narrow bed, laptop open, researching something I probably should have looked into weeks ago. Not lottery procedures, though that information was bookmarked in another tab. Instead, I was reading about something called financial abuse, a term that had popped up in an article about adult children who exploit their parents. The descriptions were uncomfortably familiar: the systematic erosion of financial boundaries, the expectation that parental resources were available without question, the way requests became demands, and demands became assumptions. The gradual isolation that happened when saying no became impossible because it threatened the relationship itself. I'd never thought of what Emma was doing as abuse. She was my daughter. She wasn't hitting me or screaming at me or threatening me with violence. She was just taking advantage of my love for her, using my desire to help her succeed as a lever to extract whatever she needed. It was abuse by 1,000 small cuts, death by 1,000 accommodations. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "How's Christmas Eve going? I keep meaning to call, but it's been crazy here with all the grandkids. Give Emma my love." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "It's been educational." Carol responded immediately. "Oh, that doesn't sound good. Everything okay?" I started to type the standard response, the automatic reassurance that everything was fine. But my fingers stopped moving. Everything wasn't fine. Everything hadn't been fine for a long time, and pretending otherwise was part of the problem. Actually, no. I think I'm having some kind of family crisis. My phone rang within 30 seconds. "Ruth, what's going on? Is Emma okay? Are you okay?" Carol's voice was warm with concern, and suddenly I felt tears threatening for the first time all day. My sister lived 3 states away, but she was the only person who still treated me like someone whose feelings mattered. "I'm not sure Emma and I are okay," I said carefully. "We're having some disagreements about boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" I found myself telling Carol everything. The attic sleeping arrangement, the constant financial requests, the way I'd been treated like hired help in my own home, the expensive breakfast pastries and my refusal to pay for them, Emma's shock that I might actually say no to something. Carol listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage in all the right places. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Ruth," she said finally, "how long has this been going on?" "Which part?" "All of it. The money requests, the taking you for granted, the assumption that your resources are available for her use." I thought about it honestly. Since she moved back in. Maybe longer. Maybe it started during college when I was helping with expenses, and it just never stopped. "And you've never said no before today?" Not really. Not about anything important. Jesus, Ruth. She's been using you. Hearing it said so plainly, by someone who loved me but wasn't emotionally invested in Emma's success, hit differently than recognizing it myself. It made it real in a way that my own internal realizations hadn't quite managed. She's my daughter, I said, the automatic defense rising even as I recognized its inadequacy. And you're her mother, not her personal bank. Being someone's parent doesn't mean you have to bankrupt yourself for their convenience. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally, you've been programmed to think that good mothers sacrifice everything for their children's happiness, even when those children are adults who should be taking care of themselves. Carol had always been the blunter of the two of us, the one who said what needed to be said, even when it was uncomfortable. It was one of the things I'd always admired about her, and one of the reasons I'd been avoiding her calls lately. I'd known she would see through the cheerful facade I'd been maintaining about Emma's return home. What should I do? I asked. What do you want to do? The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what I wanted, rather than what I was willing to provide? I want to feel like a person instead of a resource, I said. I want Emma to care about my comfort and my dignity, not just my ability to solve her problems. I want to stop being afraid that if I say no, she'll leave and never come back. And if she did leave and never come back? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'd been so afraid of this outcome that I'd never really examined what it would actually mean. I'd be sad, I said slowly, but I'd also be free. Free to do what? That was the question, wasn't it? Free to do what? I'd spent so many years defining myself in relation to other people's needs that I wasn't sure I remembered what my own needs looked like. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I'd have to figure that out. Ruth, can I tell you something? You sound more like yourself than you have in months. Whatever's happening there, however hard it is, it's waking you up. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet attic and thought about what Carol had said. I did feel more awake, more present in my own life than I had in years. The confrontation with Emma, uncomfortable as it had been, had forced me to articulate things I'd been thinking but not acknowledging. It had made me visible to myself again. Downstairs, I could hear the preparations for Christmas Eve dinner beginning. Emma calling out instructions, Derek responding with strained cheerfulness, the clatter of dishes and the opening and closing of cabinet doors. They were proceeding with their celebration, apparently having decided that my participation was optional as long as my house remained available. Around 4 o'clock, Emma knocked on the attic door again. Mom, can I come up? I closed my laptop and told her to come in. She climbed the narrow stairs slowly, and when she reached the top, she looked around the dusty space, with what might have been genuine surprise. God, it really is cold up here, isn't it? Yes, it is. She sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle her dress. She'd changed into something elegant and Christmas appropriate, deep green velvet that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I wanted to apologize, she said. About this morning, I mean. I think maybe I didn't handle things very well. I waited for her to continue, noting that she'd said she didn't handle things well, not that she'd asked me to do something unreasonable. Derek's parents are really important to his career, she went on. And I guess I got caught up in trying to make a good impression. I didn't think about how it might feel from your perspective. How do you think it felt from my perspective? Emma shifted uncomfortably. I guess it felt like I was taking advantage of you. But Mom, you have to understand. I never meant it that way. I've always been able to count on you for help, and I thought this was just more of the same. What if I told you that this isn't the same? What if I told you that being asked to spend $300 I don't have on breakfast pastries feels different from being asked to help with college expenses? I would say you're right, and I'm sorry. Derek should have been clearer about the cost. If I'd known it was going to be that much, I would have found another solution. What other solution? I don't know. Something less expensive. Regular pastries from the grocery store, maybe. Or Derek could have paid for his own parents' breakfast. Emma's expression tightened slightly. Derek's in a difficult financial position right now. His business is just getting started, and client payments are irregular. He's doing the best he can. So why is his financial situation my responsibility to manage? It's not. I never said it was. But you asked me to manage it by paying for things he ordered. I asked you to help out temporarily until his situation stabilizes. Emma, what if his situation never stabilizes? What if this is just who Derek is? Someone who makes plans he can't afford and expects other people to cover the cost. I could see Emma bristling at the implied criticism of Derek. That's not fair. You don't know him well enough to make that judgment. You're right, I don't know him well. But I know that in the 6 months he's been practically living here, he's never once offered to contribute to groceries, utilities, or household expenses. I know that he uses my house like a hotel and my resources like they're freely available. I know that he ordered expensive catering and specialty coffee without having the money to pay for it, just assuming someone else would handle the bill. He's going through a rough patch. Once his business takes off, you'll probably move in together, and this won't be my problem anymore. But right now, today, I'm being asked to subsidize a lifestyle that Derek can't afford and you can't afford either. Emma was quiet for a moment, picking at the velvet fabric of her dress. What do you want me to do? We can't uninvite Derek's parents. We can't cancel Christmas Eve dinner. I'm not asking you to cancel anything. I'm asking you to figure out how to pay for it yourselves. With what money? That's not my problem to solve. The phrase was becoming a refrain, but it felt necessary. For too many years, I'd made other people's problems my problems to solve. It was a hard habit to break. Mom, I don't understand what's changed. You've always been supportive of my relationships, my goals, my dreams. Why are you being so difficult about this? Because supporting your dreams shouldn't require sacrificing my dignity. Because helping you succeed shouldn't mean enabling Derek's financial irresponsibility. Because I'm your mother, not your personal ATM. Emma's eyes flashed with anger. Nobody asked you to be a personal ATM, didn't they? When you asked me to pay for catering I didn't order, coffee I don't drink, and pastries I can't afford, what exactly are you asking me to be? I'm asking you to be family, to help out when we need it, the way family does. And what about when I need help? When do I get to ask you to contribute to the household expenses that have increased since you moved in? When do I get to ask Derek to pay for the utilities he's been using, or replace the food he's been eating, or contribute to the mortgage on the house he's been treating like his personal residence? Emma stared at me as if I'd suggested something outrageous. You want me to pay rent? To my own mother? I want you to act like an adult who understands that resources aren't infinite and that other people's comfort matters too. I do understand that. Do you? Because you asked me to sleep in the attic so Derek's parents could have my bedroom, and you didn't seem to think there was anything problematic about that request. It's only for a few days. It's my house, Emma. It's my bedroom. The fact that you felt comfortable asking me to give it up, without offering any alternative accommodation, without even acknowledging the inconvenience, tells me that you don't understand much about my comfort at all. Emma was crying now, but they looked like angry tears rather than sad ones. I don't know what you want from me. I can't go back in time and handle things differently. I want you to handle things differently going forward. I want you to ask instead of assuming. I want you to consider my comfort instead of just your convenience. I want you to treat me like a person whose needs matter, not just like a resource to be managed. I've never treated you like a resource. Haven't you? When was the last time you asked about my day? About my job, my health, my goals, my dreams? When was the last time you showed interest in my life that didn't relate to what I could do for you? Emma opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see her searching, her memory, trying to find examples that would contradict what I'd said. I care about your life, she said finally. Do you? Or do you care about my willingness to support your life? That's not fair. Isn't it? Emma, you've been living here for 6 months. In all that time, how many conversations have we had that weren't about your job search, your relationship with Derek, your financial needs, or your plans for the future? How many times have you asked about my plans, my needs, my feelings, about having 2 additional adults living in my space? The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of realizations that neither of us particularly wanted to face. I thought you liked having us here, Emma said quietly. I thought you were lonely after Dad left, and having us around made you happier. I did like having you here at first. I missed you when you moved out after college, and it was nice to have family in the house again. But Emma, having family in the house is different from having roommates who don't contribute to expenses and guests who never leave. Derek's not a guest. He's my boyfriend. Derek is someone who sleeps here most nights, eats here most days, uses the shower and the electricity and the heat, but has never once offered to help with the cost of any of those things. In most contexts, that's called a freeloader. Emma flinched at the word. Derek's not a freeloader, he's building a business, he's investing in our future. With my money. That's not true, isn't it? He ordered catering with the expectation that I would pay for it. He's been living here for months without contributing to household expenses. He's using my car because his is broken, and he can't afford to fix it. How is that not using my money to fund his lifestyle? Because it's temporary. Once his business takes off. Emma, what if it doesn't? What if Derek's business never takes off? What if he's just someone who's good at making plans but bad at executing them? What if he's someone who's comfortable letting other people pay for his dreams? You don't know him like I do. You're right, I don't. But I know what I've observed. And what I've observed is someone who makes expensive plans without having the resources to pay for them, and who expects the people around him to make up the difference. Emma stood up abruptly, smoothing her dress with sharp, angry movements. I came up here to apologize and try to work things out. But you're determined to think the worst of Derek and the worst of me. I'm not thinking the worst of anyone. I'm just recognizing patterns that I should have recognized months ago. What patterns? The pattern of being expected to solve problems I didn't create with resources I don't have. The pattern of being treated like my comfort doesn't matter as long as everyone else gets what they want. The pattern of being taken for granted until the moment I say no, and then being told I'm being unreasonable. Emma paused at the top of the stairs, her hand on the railing. So what happens now? Are you going to kick us out? Ruin Christmas? Make Derek's parents think we're all crazy? I'm not going to kick you out, but I'm also not going to keep pretending that this arrangement is working for me. Something needs to change. What needs to change? Everything, I said quietly. The financial expectations, the living arrangements, the assumption that my resources are available for your use. All of it. And if I can't change all of that? If Derek and I can't afford to live somewhere else right now, then you'll need to figure out how to be respectful, contributing members of this household instead of guests who never leave. Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to argue further or cut her losses. Finally, she chose diplomacy. Okay, she said, we can talk about that. After Christmas. After Derek's parents leave and things calm down. No, I said, we talk about it now. Before I spend one more day sleeping in the attic while Derek's parents enjoy my bedroom. Mom, please. They're leaving tomorrow afternoon. Can't we just get through the next 18 hours without any more drama? There won't be any drama if you move your things back to your old room and I move back into my bedroom tonight. What about Derek's parents? What about them? There's a perfectly good guest room they can use. But Derek promised them the master suite. Derek doesn't have the authority to promise them my bedroom. You can explain that there was a miscommunication. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. They'll think we're disorganized, unprofessional. They'll think Derek made promises he couldn't keep, which is exactly what happened. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Just one more night. Tomorrow they'll be gone, and we can rearrange everything back to normal. I looked at my daughter, standing at the top of the attic stairs in her expensive dress, pleading with me to continue sleeping in a cold, dusty room so that her boyfriend's parents wouldn't be inconvenienced. 6 months ago, I would have said yes. 6 months ago, I would have prioritized her comfort over my own dignity, would have chosen peace over self-respect. But 6 months ago, I hadn't been carrying a $47 million lottery ticket in my wallet. 6 months ago, I hadn't understood that my willingness to be accommodating had been transformed into an expectation that I would be infinitely accommodating. 6 months ago, I hadn't realized that being a good mother didn't require being a doormat. No, I said. Emma's face went white. No? Number? I will not spend another night sleeping in the attic of my own house. Derek's parents can use the guest room, or they can find a hotel, or Derek can give them his room and sleep on the couch. But I'm sleeping in my own bedroom tonight. Mom, you're being unreasonable. I'm being reasonable for the first time in months. Everyone else has been unreasonable. Emma turned and clattered down the attic stairs, and I could hear her rushed footsteps crossing the floor below. Then Derek's voice, sharp with anxiety, and Emma's responding in urgent, hushed tones. Then Richard's voice, asking what was wrong, and Patricia saying something about perhaps they should consider other accommodations. I stayed in the attic for another hour, listening to the increasingly frantic negotiations happening below. At one point, Derek came upstairs and knocked on the door. "Ruth, could we talk for a minute?" I opened the door to find him looking haggard and desperate, his careful composure finally cracking under the pressure of his imploding plans. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," he said. "Emma's upset, my parents are confused, and I'm just trying to figure out how to make everyone happy. Everyone except me, apparently." "That's not true. I want you to be happy too. But Ruth, my parents flew across the country for this. They're expecting a certain level of hospitality, and if we start moving people around and changing arrangements, it's going to look really bad." "Bad for whom?" "For me. For Emma. For our relationship with my family. And how do you think it looks that you're keeping your girlfriend's mother in the attic so your parents can be comfortable?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is. How is it not as bad as it sounds? I'm sleeping in a cold, dusty attic because you promised your parents my bedroom without asking me. How is that acceptable? It's only temporary. It's my house, Derek. Temporary or not, you don't get to decide where I sleep in my own house." I know. And I'm grateful for your flexibility. After Christmas, when things calm down, Emma and I want to sit down and talk about a more permanent arrangement. Maybe we can work out some kind of rental agreement. Make this whole thing more official. A rental agreement for what? For Emma's room. And maybe the guest room too, since I'm here so often. We'd pay fair market rate, of course. It would be better for everyone. You'd have guaranteed income and we'd have more security. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. Derek wanted to turn my house into a rental property, with him and Emma as tenants. He wanted to formalize an arrangement that would give him legal standing in my home, while providing me with the privilege of collecting rent from my own daughter. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want to pay me rent to live in my house?" "Exactly. It would make everything more clear-cut, more professional." "And you think this would be better for me because you'd have steady rental income, because the arrangement would be official instead of informal, because everyone would know where they stand." "Where I would stand is as a landlord in my own home collecting rent from my daughter and her boyfriend." "Right. It would be a business relationship instead of a family relationship. Cleaner boundaries, less emotional complication." The idea was so fundamentally wrong that I almost laughed. Derek wanted to solve the problem of taking advantage of my family relationship by eliminating the family relationship entirely. He wanted to reduce me from mother to landlord, from family to service provider. "Derek," I said, "I don't want to be my daughter's landlord. I want to be her mother. But this way you could be both." "No, this way I could be neither. This way Emma becomes my tenant, and I become someone who provides housing in exchange for payment. That's not a mother-daughter relationship. That's a business transaction." Derek's face fell as he realized his brilliant solution wasn't being received as positively as he'd hoped. "I thought you'd see it as a win-win situation. The only people who win in that situation are you and Emma. You get to stay in my house with official legitimacy, and Emma gets to avoid the inconvenience of finding her own place. I get to become a landlord in my own home, with all the legal complications that entails, plus the joy of having to evict my own daughter if she ever stops paying rent. It wouldn't come to that, wouldn't it? What happens if Emma loses her job? What happens if your business fails? What happens if you two break up and can't afford the rent separately? Do I take my daughter to court? Do I put a lien on her possessions? Do I go through the legal eviction process with my own child? Derek clearly hadn't thought through these scenarios. We'd work something out. We'd be right back where we started, except now there would be a lease involved and everything would be even more complicated. So what do you want us to do? I want you to be adults who take responsibility for your own housing situation instead of expecting me to provide a solution to your problems. But in the meantime, I want you to move your things out of my bedroom so I can sleep there tonight. Derek's jaw tightened with frustration. Ruth, please, just one more night. My parents will leave tomorrow and then we can figure everything else out. No? What do you mean no? I mean no. I will not spend another night in the attic. I will not continue to prioritize your parents' comfort over my own dignity. I will not keep enabling this fantasy that you can make expensive plans and expect other people to pay for them. Derek stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Like Emma, he seemed genuinely surprised by my refusal to be accommodating. They'd both become so accustomed to my willingness to sacrifice my own comfort for their convenience that the idea of me saying no was apparently shocking. This is really bad timing, Ruth. For whom? For all of us. Christmas Eve, my parents here, Emma trying to make a good impression. Couldn't you just go along with things for one more day? I've been going along with things for 6 months, Derek. I've gone along with you living here without contributing to expenses. I've gone along with you using my car, my utilities, my space, my resources. I've gone along with being treated like an innkeeper in my own home. I'm done going along with things. What's that supposed to mean? It means things are going to change, starting tonight. Derek opened his mouth to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. He could probably hear the finality in my voice, the sense that I'd reached a decision that wasn't subject to negotiation. Fine, he said, but I hope you realize you're ruining Christmas for everyone. I'm not ruining Christmas. I'm just refusing to sacrifice my own comfort to make someone else's Christmas more convenient. After Derek left, I began gathering my things from the dusty attic corners where I'd scattered them over the past 2 days. It didn't take long. I'd brought very little up here, having expected that my exile would be brief and that I'd want to minimize the inconvenience. Now I realized that the inconvenience had been the point. The more inconvenient my situation became, the more accommodating I was supposed to be in return. The more I sacrificed, the more grateful everyone else became for my willingness to sacrifice. It was a perverse incentive system that rewarded my compliance with increasing demands for compliance. As I folded my clothes and gathered my toiletries, I could hear the urgent conversations continuing below. Emma's voice, high with stress. Derek's, tight with barely controlled anger. Richard and Patricia, asking diplomatic questions about alternative arrangements. The sound of suitcases being moved, of plans being rapidly revised. I wasn't ruining Christmas. Christmas had been ruined from the moment my daughter asked me to sleep in the attic so her boyfriend could impress his parents. Christmas had been ruined from the moment Derek ordered expensive catering he couldn't afford and expected me to pay for it. Christmas had been ruined from the moment my comfort became negotiable and everyone else's became sacred. All I was doing was refusing to pretend otherwise. When I finally came downstairs with my armload of belongings, I found the living room empty except for Patricia, who was sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, looking thoughtful. "Ruth," she said when she saw me, "I owe you an apology." I set my things down by the stairs, surprised by her directness. For what? For accepting accommodations that were made at your expense without questioning whether you'd actually agreed to them. Richard and I should have asked more questions when Derek told us you'd offered your bedroom. It seemed oddly generous, and we should have trusted our instincts. I sat down in the armchair across from her, studying her face. Patricia looked genuinely uncomfortable, and there was something in her expression that suggested she understood more about the family dynamics than I'd given her credit for. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know. Derek is a lovely young man, but he sometimes has a tendency to expand the truth when it serves his purposes. Richard and I have noticed this before, in other contexts. He'll describe situations as more settled than they actually are, or present plans as more concrete than they really are. Have you talked to him about this?" Patricia smiled ruefully. "We've tried, but Derek is very good at making his version of events sound reasonable, and were often working with incomplete information. In this case, we simply took his word that the sleeping arrangements had been mutually agreed upon. They weren't. No, I gathered that, and I'm sorry we didn't question it sooner. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who understood each other despite having just met. If I may ask, Patricia said carefully, what's your plan for moving forward? With Derek and Emma, I mean. It was a diplomatic way of asking whether I was going to kick them out, and whether their Christmas visit was about to become even more awkward than it already was. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. I'm still figuring out what boundaries I need to set and how to enforce them. Boundaries are important, Patricia said. Richard and I learned that the hard way with Derek. When he was younger, we enabled some of his more impractical tendencies because we wanted to be supportive. But support without boundaries isn't actually helpful. It just teaches people that they don't need to be responsible for the consequences of their choices. How did you change that dynamic? We stopped solving problems for him. We stopped providing financial safety nets for plans he hadn't thought through properly. We started asking hard questions about his goals and his strategies for achieving them. It was difficult at first because Derek was used to being able to charm his way out of accountability. But eventually, he learned to be more realistic about what he could actually accomplish. Did it damage your relationship? Temporarily, yes. Derek went through a period of being quite angry with us, of feeling that we were being unsupportive and unreasonable. But once he adjusted to the new dynamic, our relationship actually became stronger. More honest, more adult. I thought about this as I listened to the continuing negotiations in the kitchen. Emma and Derek were still trying to solve the problem of where everyone would sleep, still operating under the assumption that my comfort was the most flexible variable in the equation. Patricia, I said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How do you think Derek would handle it if Emma set firmer boundaries with him? If she stopped enabling his financial irresponsibility and started expecting him to contribute equally to their shared expenses? Patricia considered this carefully. I think it would be very good for him ultimately, but I think he would resist it initially, because he's become accustomed to having his financial shortfalls covered by other people's generosity. He's never had to fully face the consequences of his planning failures. And if Emma isn't willing to set those boundaries, then she'll find herself in the position you've been in, subsidizing someone else's dreams at the expense of her own financial security. The conversation was interrupted by Derek appearing in the doorway, looking harried and frustrated. Mom, Dad, I've got everything worked out. You'll take the guest room, I'll sleep on the couch, and Emma will stay in her room. Ruth can have her bedroom back. He said this last part with the air of someone making a magnanimous gesture rather than simply correcting a situation that should never have existed in the first place. Thank you, I said simply. And tomorrow, after you leave, we'll sit down and work out a more permanent arrangement that works better for everyone. Patricia and Richard exchanged a look that suggested they had thoughts about Derek's ability to create arrangements that worked better for everyone. But they kept those thoughts to themselves. That sounds like a good plan, Richard said diplomatically. As I carried my belongings upstairs to my own bedroom, I felt a mixture of relief and something else I couldn't quite identify. Victory, maybe, but a small and slightly hollow one. I'd won the right to sleep in my own bed, but I hadn't solved the larger problem of how to live with people who saw my resources as extensions of their own. My bedroom felt different when I walked into it, changed by having been occupied by strangers who saw it as a commodity rather than a personal space. Patricia and Richard had been neat and respectful guests, but their presence had marked the room as something that could be negotiated away, something that was mine only as long as no one else needed it more. I sat down on my own bed and pulled out my wallet, extracting the lottery ticket that had been my secret companion through this entire ordeal. $47 million. Enough money to never again have to negotiate for my own comfort. Enough money to make everyone's financial problems disappear overnight. Enough money to buy peace, if peace was for sale. But I was beginning to understand that peace wasn't for sale, at least not the kind I actually wanted. The kind of peace that came from money was the peace of having enough power to avoid conflict, not the peace of having relationships that didn't require conflict avoidance. It was the peace of being able to buy compliance, not the peace of being genuinely respected. The lottery ticket could solve my immediate problems, but it couldn't solve the fundamental, issue of being in relationships with people who valued me primarily for what I could provide. In fact, it might make that problem worse by giving me more to provide. I folded the ticket and put it back in my wallet, not because I'd decided against claiming it, but because I was beginning to realize that the money was only one option among many. And before I decided what to do about the money, I needed to decide what to do about everything else. Tomorrow, Derek's parents would leave. Tomorrow, the crisis of Christmas accommodations would be over. But the larger crisis of how to live with dignity while being financially and emotionally exploited would remain. And that crisis wouldn't be solved by money, no matter how much of it I had. It would be solved by choices. Hard choices about what I was willing to accept and what I was willing to risk. Choices about whether I wanted relationships that required me to be endlessly accommodating, or whether I was willing to face the possibility that setting boundaries might cost me the relationships entirely. As I got ready for bed in my own bathroom, using my own towels, sleeping in my own space for the first time in days, I realized that I'd already started making those choices. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Christmas morning arrived with an artificial cheerfulness that felt brittle enough to shatter at the slightest touch. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through my own windows, and for a moment I almost forgot about the tension that had been building over the past few days. Then I heard Emma's voice in the kitchen, unnaturally bright as she chatted with Derek's parents, and reality came flooding back. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel confident rather than apologetic. If today was going to bring confrontations, I wanted to face them feeling like myself, rather than like someone who needed to earn her place in her own home. When I came downstairs, I found the kitchen transformed into something resembling a holiday magazine spread. Emma had clearly been up early, arranging fresh flowers and setting out what appeared to be homemade cinnamon rolls. The coffee smelled expensive, and I realized she must have found money somewhere to replace the Ethiopian blend I'd refused to buy. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Emma said, her smile bright but strained around the edges. "I made breakfast for everyone. Your favorite cinnamon rolls, from that recipe Grandma used to make." Richard and Patricia were sitting at the table, looking refreshed despite the previous day's upheaval. Derek appeared from the living room, carrying an armload of wrapped presents that looked professionally done. "Ruth, Merry Christmas," he said, setting the gifts under the small tree. "I hope you don't mind, but I picked up a few things for everyone. Just small tokens of appreciation." I watched him arrange the presents with practiced ease, noting that the gifts were all roughly the same size. Generic presents, probably purchased yesterday in a panic, when he realized his Christmas plans hadn't included gifts for the woman whose house he'd been living in for 6 months. Emma distributed coffee to everyone, moving with the nervous efficiency of someone trying to orchestrate a perfect moment through sheer force of will. We were playing the roles of a happy family gathering, but everyone in the room knew it was a performance. "Should we open presents?" Emma suggested after we'd finished eating. Derek handed out his gifts first. Richard and Patricia received bottles of wine. Emma got something in a small jewelry box that made her smile. Then he handed me a wrapped package that felt like a picture frame. Inside was a generic Home Sweet Home sign, the kind of mass-produced decoration sold at craft stores year-round. "Thank you," I said, because politeness was automatic even when sincerity wasn't. Emma's gifts were more thoughtful. When she handed me my present, her eyes were bright with an emotion I couldn't quite read. Inside the elegant wrapping was a jewelry box containing a delicate necklace with a small silver heart engraved, with "Best Mom" in flowing script. "I saw it and thought of you," Emma said, watching my face carefully. "Because you really are the best mom. You've always been there for me, always supported me, always put my needs first." The gift was beautiful, and Emma's words were exactly what I'd wanted to hear for months. But something about the timing felt calculated, as if the necklace and sentiment were designed to smooth over the previous day's conflicts rather than address them. "There's one more thing," Emma said, producing an envelope. "Derek and I realized we haven't been contributing enough to the household, so we wrote you a check to cover our share of expenses for the past few months." She handed me the envelope with a flourish. Inside was a check for $300, signed by Derek in his careful handwriting. $300 for 6 months of groceries, utilities, and general disruption of my living space. It was such an inadequate amount, that it felt almost insulting. "This is very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but it doesn't really address the ongoing situation." Emma's smile flickered. "What do you mean?" "I mean that $300 for 6 months of expenses is far below what Derek would pay for a month of rent anywhere else. And a one-time payment doesn't establish any ongoing arrangement for the future." Derek stepped forward, his expression serious. "Ruth, about that. Emma and I have been talking, and we think the rental agreement idea could really work well for everyone. We'd pay fair market rent, sign a proper lease, everything above board and professional." "I already told you I'm not interested in becoming my daughter's landlord." "But think about the advantages," Derek continued. "Guaranteed income for you, legal protections for everyone, clear boundaries. Ruth, what would you say to $1,200 a month for Emma's room and shared use of common areas?" I stared at him, trying to process the audacity of someone negotiating rental terms for my own house on Christmas morning in front of his parents, as if it were a perfectly normal business transaction. "Derek," I said slowly, "do you understand that this is my home? Not an investment property, not a boarding house, but the place where I live." "Of course I understand that. That's why I think a formal arrangement would be better for everyone. I don't want professional boundaries with my daughter. I want a mother-daughter relationship." Patricia set down her coffee cup with a small clink that somehow conveyed volumes about her opinion of her son's negotiating skills. "Derek, dear, I'm not sure Christmas morning is the appropriate time for lease negotiations." "Why not? We're all adults here. Ruth, $1,200 is fair market rate for this area. Plus, we'd take over responsibility for groceries and utilities, so you'd actually come out ahead financially." "Derek," I said, "what happens when you and Emma break up?" His face went blank. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what happens to this lease arrangement when your relationship with Emma ends? Do I evict my own daughter? Do I take her to court for unpaid rent?" "We're not going to break up," Emma said quickly. "Derek and I are committed to building a future together." "I hope that's true. But relationships end sometimes, even committed ones. And I'm not willing to risk having to choose between legal action against my daughter and being trapped in a financial arrangement that no longer works." Derek's jaw tightened with frustration. "So what's your alternative? We can't keep living in this kind of uncertainty." "My alternative is for you to take responsibility for your own housing situation instead of expecting me to provide a solution to your problems." "But that's not realistic right now. Emma's still job hunting, my business is just getting established first month and last month, and security deposits are impossible to save up for. Those are all real challenges. But they're your challenges to solve, not mine. So you're just going to kick us out? Make us homeless right after Christmas?" The word homeless was clearly chosen for maximum emotional impact, designed to make me feel guilty for not continuing to subsidize their lifestyle indefinitely. "Derek, you're not homeless. You're adults with options. You can find jobs that pay enough to afford housing. You can look for less expensive accommodations. You can ask your parents for help." Richard and Patricia exchanged a look, and I had the sense that Derek asking his parents for help was not an option he'd fully explored. "My parents have already done enough for me," Derek said stiffly. "I don't want to be dependent on them." "But you're comfortable being dependent on me?" "That's different." "How is it different?" Derek struggled for an answer. "Because you're Emma's family. Because this arrangement benefits you too." "Derek, you just offered to pay $1,200 a month for a room. Do you currently have $1,200 a month?" "Well, not right now, but once my business." "Then you're not contributing to the household. You're promising to contribute at some unspecified future date." "That's not the same thing." Emma had been growing increasingly agitated during this exchange, and now she exploded. "Mom, what do you want from us? We're trying to be responsible. We're trying to work out a fair arrangement, but nothing we offer is good enough for you. What I want is for you to understand that being responsible means taking care of your own needs, not expecting other people to take care of them for you. I do treat you like a person. Do you?" "Emma, when was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about having 2 additional adults living in my space? When was the last time you considered my preferences before making plans that affected my home?" Emma's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I thought you were happy to have us here. I did like the company at first. But company that never leaves becomes something else entirely. Company that doesn't contribute to expenses while using resources becomes something else entirely. So what are you saying? That you want us to leave? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma was asking me to choose between my comfort and our relationship, between my dignity and her presence in my life. I thought about the lottery ticket upstairs in my wallet. $47 million that could make all of these problems disappear, could buy Emma a house of her own. I thought about how easy it would be to solve this conflict with money instead of confrontation. But I also thought about what Patricia had said about boundaries and enablement. I thought about the difference between helping someone succeed and helping someone avoid the consequences of their choices. What I'm saying is that I want you to make adult decisions about your living situation. If that means staying here, then we need to establish real boundaries and real contributions that work for everyone. If that means finding somewhere else to live, then that's what adult couples do. But Mom, Emma, you're 25 years old. Derek is 27. You're adults who need to take responsibility for your own lives. Derek stepped forward, his face red with frustration. Ruth, you're being completely unreasonable. We're offering to pay rent, to sign a lease, to make this a legitimate business arrangement. I want you to stop treating my refusal to subsidize your lifestyle as unreasonable behavior. We're not asking you to subsidize anything, aren't you? Derek, you've been living here for 6 months without paying rent, utilities, or groceries. You've used my car, my internet, my household supplies. You've ordered expensive catering with the expectation that I would pay for it. How is that not asking me to subsidize your lifestyle? Because we're going to pay you back. When? With what money? Derek, your business has been just getting established for the entire time you've been here. At what point do you acknowledge that your business plan might not be working? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps Patricia and I should give you some privacy to work this out. No, I said. Actually, I'd like you to stay. Because I think Derek needs to hear this from someone other than me. I turned to face Derek directly. Derek, your parents raised you to be responsible and self-sufficient. I think they would be disappointed to know that you've been living in my house for 6 months without contributing to expenses. Derek's face went white. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? You're offering to pay $1,200 a month starting at some unspecified future date. You're asking me to sign a lease with someone who doesn't currently have the ability to pay rent. Derek, Patricia said quietly, is this true? Have you been living here without contributing to expenses? Derek looked trapped. Mom, it's more complicated than that. My business is seasonal, client payments are irregular. Son, Richard said, that's not an answer to your mother's question. Derek finally nodded. I haven't been paying rent, but I've been contributing in other ways. I help around the house, I bring in groceries sometimes. Derek, Patricia said, and her voice carried the weight of years of parental disappointment. You're 27 years old. You can't live in someone else's house for 6 months without paying expenses and call it a contribution. But Ruth said it was okay. I stared at him. I never said it was okay. You never asked if it was okay. You moved in gradually, and eventually you were just living here. I never agreed to support you financially. You never asked me to pay rent? I shouldn't have to ask a grown man to contribute to the household expenses of the place where he's living. That should be automatic. Richard stood up abruptly. Derek, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself and disrespecting Ruth in her own home. Dad, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You've been living rent-free in this woman's house for months while she pays for your food, your utilities, and your general upkeep. And now you're angry because she's finally said no. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But, no buts, son. Patricia and I raised you better than this. We taught you to be self-sufficient and responsible. We did not teach you to take advantage of other people's generosity. Patricia nodded in agreement. Derek, honey, we're disappointed. This isn't the young man we thought we'd raised. What am I supposed to do? Emma and I can't afford a place of our own right now. Then you find jobs that pay enough to afford a place. or you find a less expensive place, or you accept that you're not ready to live together yet, Richard said firmly. What you don't do is expect Emma's mother to solve your housing problem for you. I felt a rush of gratitude toward Derek's parents that was so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. For months, I'd been questioning my own judgment, wondering if I was being unreasonable. Having two successful adults validate my position felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Emma had been growing increasingly upset during this exchange, and now she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I can't believe you're doing this. It's Christmas morning. You're humiliating us in front of Derek's family." "Emma, I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm just refusing to pretend that the situation we've been living with is acceptable. I don't understand what's changed. You used to be supportive of my goals. I still want you to succeed, but I've learned that there's a difference between supporting your success and enabling your avoidance of adult responsibilities. How is living here enabling anything? Emma, you're 25 years old and you've never lived independently. You've never had to budget for rent and utilities and groceries. You've never had to make hard choices about what you can and can't afford. How is that preparing you for adult life?" Emma stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "But why would I struggle financially if I don't have to? Why would I pay rent when I can live here?" And there it was, the fundamental difference in our perspectives. Emma saw my house as a resource, available for her use, a way to avoid the inconveniences of adult life while pursuing her goals. "Because struggle teaches you things that comfort can't," I said. "Because learning to support yourself builds confidence and competence. Because the goal of parenting isn't to make your child's life as easy as possible forever. It's to prepare them to handle life's difficulties on their own. But I'm not ready for that yet." "When will you be ready? When you're 30? 35? When you have children of your own who need to learn independence from you?" Richard cleared his throat again. "Derek, Patricia and I think it's time for us to head back to the hotel. Dad, you don't have to leave. We can work this out. Son, there's nothing for us to work out. This is between you and Emma and Ruth. But I will say this, your mother and I are not going to help you continue this arrangement. If you need financial assistance to find your own place, we'll consider that. But we're not going to support you living rent-free in someone else's house." Derek looked stricken. "You're cutting me off too? We're encouraging you to be the responsible adult we raised you to be." As Richard and Patricia went upstairs to collect their belongings, Derek and Emma huddled together in urgent conversation. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat down on my bed, pulling out my wallet and extracting the lottery ticket one more time. $47 million. Enough money to solve everyone's problems instantly. The money could make all of this conflict disappear. It could restore peace to our family, could make Emma grateful and loving again, could turn me from the villain of this story into the hero. But I'd learned something important over the past few days. The conflict wasn't really about money. It was about respect. It was about being seen as a person rather than a resource. The lottery money could buy me compliance, but it couldn't buy me genuine love or respect. In fact, it might destroy any possibility of those things by creating a new dynamic where Emma and Derek saw me as a source of unlimited resources. I folded the ticket and put it back in my wallet, not because I was afraid to claim it, but because I was finally ready to find out who my daughter really was when she couldn't use me as a solution to her problems. When I came back downstairs, Derek's parents were waiting by the front door with their suitcases. Patricia hugged me goodbye, whispering, "You're doing the right thing, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." After they left, the house felt different. Quieter, but also more tense. Emma and Derek sat at my kitchen table, looking shell-shocked and defeated. "So what happens now?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Now you decide what kind of adults you want to be," I said. "You can look for jobs that pay enough to support independent living. You can find a less expensive place to live. You can ask Derek's parents for help. You have options. But none of those options let us stay here. You can stay here if you're willing to contribute fairly to the household and treat me like a person whose comfort matters. But you can't stay here and continue the arrangement we've had for the past 6 months." Derek looked up from the table, his face haggard with stress. What would fair contribution look like? Market rate rent for the space you're using, plus your share of utilities, groceries, and household supplies. Probably around $1,500 a month, split between the two of you. Derek's face went white. I don't have $1,500 a month. Then you don't have the ability to live here. But that's so much money, we'd never be able to save anything. Derek, that's what housing costs. That's what every other couple your age pays to live somewhere. The fact that you can't afford it just means you can't afford to live independently yet. Emma had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Mom, what if I stayed and Derek found somewhere else to live temporarily? I felt a flicker of hope at this suggestion. Maybe Emma was finally ready to prioritize our relationship over Derek's convenience. That could work, I said carefully. If you're willing to contribute fairly to household expenses, and treat this as a temporary arrangement while you figure out your own independent living situation. But Derek immediately shook his head. Emma, we can't be separated. We're building a life together. But Derek, if we can't afford to live together right now, we'll figure something out. There has to be another option. I watched this exchange with growing clarity about the dynamics of their relationship. Derek expected Emma to prioritize his preferences over her own practical needs. He expected her to sacrifice her relationship with me rather than asking him to take responsibility for his own housing situation. Emma, I said quietly, you don't have to sacrifice your relationship with me to solve Derek's problems. I'm not sacrificing anything. We just need to stay together. Why? The question seemed to catch Emma off guard. Because we're a couple. Because we love each other. And that future requires you to give up your relationship with me? No, it requires you to be supportive of my choices. I am supportive of your choices. I'm just not willing to subsidize choices you can't afford to make. Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and desperation. This is impossible. You're making it impossible for us to stay together. Derek, I'm not responsible for making your relationship possible. That's your job and Emma's job. But we need help. We need support. And your parents made it clear that they're willing to help you find independent housing. They're just not willing to help you continue taking advantage of me. Derek stared at me, and I could see him cycling through anger, denial, and finally something that might have been recognition. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed to be seeing himself from someone else's perspective. I never meant for it to be like that, he said quietly. Maybe not, but that's what it became. Derek and Emma looked at each other, and I could see them having a silent conversation about options they'd never seriously considered before. For the first time, they were being forced to confront the reality that their plans depended on resources they didn't have. We need some time to figure this out, Emma said finally. How much time? 2 weeks? To figure out what? To find jobs, to look for apartments, to make a plan that doesn't depend on you. I nodded. 2 weeks. But during those 2 weeks, I want to see real effort toward independence, not just more promises about eventual responsibility. 3 months later, I was sitting in my quiet kitchen, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee that I'd chosen myself. Emma had moved out 2 weeks after Christmas, finding a small apartment across town that she shared with a roommate from her new job. Derek had moved back in with his parents while he quote, restructured his business model, which seemed to be a euphemism for getting a real job. Emma and I talked once a week now, conversations that were sometimes awkward but increasingly honest. She was learning to budget, learning to prioritize expenses, learning the satisfaction that came from supporting herself. It wasn't easy for her, but she was discovering strengths she hadn't known she had. Derek had stopped by once to collect some belongings he'd left behind. He'd been polite, but distant, clearly still believing that I had been unreasonable. I suspected he was telling people a version of the story where I had kicked him out for no good reason, but I found I didn't care what version of events he preferred. My house felt like mine again. I'd redecorated Emma's old room as a home office, finally claiming space for my own projects and interests. I'd started cooking again, trying new recipes without worrying about feeding extra people or accommodating other people's preferences. And the lottery ticket was still in my wallet. I'd thought about claiming it many times over the past few months. $47 million could buy me a lot of things. Travel, security, the ability to help Emma and even Derek if I chose to. But I'd also realized that keeping the money secret had given me something equally valuable: the knowledge that I could stand up for myself without financial leverage. The knowledge that I was worth respecting regardless of what I could provide. I would claim the money eventually, I thought. But first, I wanted to enjoy this new version of myself. This woman who had remembered that her comfort mattered, that her dignity was non-negotiable, that love without respect wasn't really love at all. The lottery ticket had taught me that the most valuable thing I owned wasn't the $47 million. It was the self-respect I'd finally learned to claim. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.